Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Asano. Thank you for this contribution from the political history of East Asia. Now we have a third contribute, and then we will open the discussion. We have Antti Pentikainen, reconciliation from the perspective of indigenous populations. So thank you very much. Antti, can you see us?
Yes, Francisco, and if you put the screen share on, I'll be able to load my...
That's great.
We switched you and me a bit.
Yeah, thank you. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. So, dear friends, I am extremely humbled to be asked to present in this very distinguished panel. I am aware that there are many people speaking and present who I consider to be the heroes in this field, including Fanny, Joseph, Tat, and many others, and of course Karina and Martin. So I'm extremely humbled as a newcomer in this field to be asked to speak. I will try to represent to some extent the viewpoint of an indigenous people, even though I am not indigenous myself, taking into account that they often can feel challenged by the concept and the term of reconciliation, but I am arguing here that it is also a question of survival for the indigenous peoples. And I'm speaking of a case where I personally got involved as a Prime Minister's envoy to help to design a reconciliation process. So just some background of the Sami. They are the last living indigenous peoples in Europe, nomadic, traditionally nomadic people in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And there's about 100,000 of them remaining. They have been subject to the colonial policies and assimilation policies, also involving the church in many cases. And since the border walls were erected in 1850, they have forcefully been settled in locations, and gradually the conflict between the settlers that have had, in cases, legal land owning rights since the 1700s has increased. And this has been especially increased since the indigenous rights movement, because there's a fear among the settlers that they would lose their right for their ancestry lands for in some cases for centuries. So, and there is a lot of pain within the community relations that exist because of this history. This picture represents the survival of the Sami way of life. So they often say that their culture and religion are connected to the way of life, and reindeer herding is of course part of that. And here is one of my friends and colleagues, Päivi, who is a PhD candidate and also works for the Sami Museum with her daughter marking the reindeer calves. And so just when this skill is transferred to a new generation, something very beautiful is happening, something that all Sami who want to maintain this way of life are extremely joyful. Of course, the question I had when I got involved was that, do I have the right as non-Sami to be involved in such a critical question as their survival? And so as a background, I wanted to show this picture, which is a picture of my father, who is an emeritus professor of comparative religion, but also ethnography. And he did an ethnographic research in one Sami village, for example, that involved several decades of interviewing of every villager. And these audio archives became very significant for this many younger Sami generations, because once they had recovered their language, they were listening to these audio tapes about the worldviews of the Sami. And I realized that in this intergenerational chain, I also can do what I can to help the Sami to survive. I don't need to ask whether I have the right, but whether I do what is possible for me. And when I ended up being trusted by the Prime Minister, I took aside that doubt and made sure that I do my best effort to assist them. Of course, then the question was, because if you want to go with the truth and reconciliation process, is that how do you make it effective? How do you make it to make an impact on the lives? And I often like to show this cartoon from South Africa. Fanny knows the realities much better, even though I was also there for a while. it is a complicated thing to move from identifying the truth into where reconciliation is felt by the community. So when we started to design the process, I used John Paul Lederach's three-track approach for mediation for reconciliation, where I was envisioning that this could provide a bridge structure from truth to reconciliation, where you have 3 tracks, simultaneous tracks. So the commission is a temporary structure, very significant of a historical transformation. But then the main focus, which I think relates to the reconciliation studies, was a track for insider reconcilers, which could be trained in an academic space. And I argue that this is also a civic skill that should be expanded in our societies, where people through reconciliation can play a difference in their families, communities, and workplaces. But then also I'd argue that there has to be a third track enabling healing and individual and community based. So a little bit go deeper into this element. When indigenous peoples do approach reconciliation, it is a question of survival, and so therefore they have to be in lead. The outsiders, you cannot enter a truth and reconciliation process without the consent of the indigenous peoples. And this was the founding panel where this idea was introduced. And the president of the Sami parliament is next to me on the left. And then we have one of the most senior Sami politicians, but also healers, a poet, a professor, and young activists who are presenting their views. We were acutely aware that, for example, in Canada, the truth process, the reconciliation process got stuck. So we had to imagine how to go beyond the commission. So that is when the idea of the insider reconcilers was created, and we created with the universities a course where you get the basic ideas and background of reconciliation, and then about the Sami context. And third, we have people who came with cases where they looked into they did conflict assessments, and then they spearheaded trying to test these reconciliation methods in their own realities. And so this is on one of the exercises when we did art and storytelling exercises in the woods, explaining, using nature as telling your life stories. So this is what I argue could be and should be one of the focus of the reconciliation studies. How do we provide these skills available in different contexts? I will not have time to explain this chart, but this is based on my two decades of work in peace mediation, how identity conflicts play out into the cycle of conflicts, but how through a truth and reconciliation process there can be a different path taken, and how we have to argue that those who are fighting for the survival can find a better way of surviving and more meaning and purpose through the process of reconciliation that also provides personal opportunities for personal healing. This picture is again with the same Sami healer. He is extremely significant in maintaining, and I think the purpose of also highlighting the reconciliation process based on the indigenous practices is to give something back that was lost. There is a lot of rights activists who are doubtful for reconciliation, and they feel that it is to water down the indigenous people's rights to exist. I argue the contrary. How can you take away from the community their right to revitalize what was lost? I think it's the question of the very survival of the indigenous people, and therefore should be in the core. So my observations on the indigenous processes are 4. 1, the approaches to reconciliation have to be determined by the communities themselves. However, a reconciliation process can revitalize what was the indigenous way of life or reconciliation practices that exist in every community and every tradition. Second, we have to be able to explain what is the intersection between indigenous rights and reconciliation. And the center I lead at the Carter School, the Mary Hock Center, is going to write a book about this with Eduardo Gonzalez, and also do that in connection with the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. Third, the effects of the intergenerational pain are such in indigenous communities that if you don't enable possibilities for healing and invest in those resources for long term, the families and communities will continue to suffer, and they will not be able to move beyond the conflict, very likely. However, the 3-track approach, I argue, can be helpful in designing a process that you have this as back-to-back, and I'm very happy to discuss that further with you. I end up with this picture of Anne Nuorgam, who was the co-host with me for the Indigenous Reconciliation Studies in the University of Lapland. She realized the significance of reconciliation and became the president of the UN Permanent Forum, campaigning for revitalizing of indigenous reconciliation practices. So I think this is well understood by the UN Permanent Forum, and we are very happy to support that. I end here.
So, thank you very much, Antti Pentikainen. Now we have Professor Martin Leiner, so he does not need any introduction. So he is the founder of the Jena Center for Reconciliation Study, theologian, and today is going to speak about religions and reconciliation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can we upload the PowerPoint?
Yes. So here we have the newest version of it.
Yeah.
So,
So thank you very much.
now I make the screen squaring screen. Screen squaring options. Here we are. Great. I think everybody now can see the PowerPoint.
So I want to talk very briefly first about reconciliation studies in general, and then about religion and reconciliation. So I tried a definition of reconciliation studies as a proposition from my side. It's about the scholarly description, interpretation, and evaluation of processes of creating normal and, if possible, good relationships between states, groups, organizations, and individuals, reacting against past, present, or preventing future grave incidents such as wars, civil wars, genocides, atrocities, forced displacement, enslavement, dictatorship, oppression, colonialism, apartheid, and other human rights violations and injustices. And seeing this definition, we can also see a certain enlargement. It's not only the service, of course, it's between states, group, organizations, and individuals, but it always touches the 5 dimensions of reconciliation with oneself, with the others, which is covered by the states, groups, organizations, and individuals, but also with one's own group, with the environment, nature perhaps, and also what we call transcendence, which means values we are believing in, or religion, God we are believing in, or if we are not believing in God or religion, so our atheistic worldview and the values we have and share. And all this must always be brought together in this process. And in most cases, reconciliation processes are multifaceted, long-term processes, including many steps and involving very different activities. And therefore, they require a transdisciplinary approach in order to explain why those processes succeed or fail. They can fail in the media, for example. They can fail in economical issues. They can fail in imbalances of military power, and also in the stereotypes between groups. And on many points they can fail and succeed as well. And the strength of our group, I think, is that we have colleagues from so many disciplines here together and working on reconciliation, which in my sense is necessary to understand all these different elements we need. And for reconciliation studies in general, I see for the future 5 tasks from my point of view. We should establish reconciliation as a topic of research of high quality in each discipline, because there is a great inequality. In some disciplines there has been done a lot, in others much less. Then to clarify the cooperation and the relationship to neighboring and overlapping scientific projects, such as transitional justice, conflict resolution, conflict transformation, mediation, peace studies, or others. because we have to deal with misunderstandings from all sides, and this clarification, in my sense, should not be separating or excluding, but more creating clarifications and scientific process. And then we should elaborate methodologies for transdisciplinary cooperation. Therefore, we need epistemology and philosophy. And this is also a big work, but it's a work where we are not alone, because there are also other transdisciplinary projects which often touch very closely also issues of reconciliation, such as refugee studies. Refugees are often in need of reconciliation, and there is reconciliation to be done with many things. There are heritage studies with heritage conflicts which need reconciliation, memory studies, post-colonial studies, and others, where we might find interesting cooperation in the nearer future. And fifth would be practical results, because this you approach reconciliation studies will be measured on the practical impact we can have to consult governments, NGOs, communities, and to help to create a more peaceful and a world where people create a deeper peace with societies themselves and each other. And now I will talk about religions and reconciliation. I have 3 points. The first one is the discovery of religions as resources for reconciliation. It's a still ongoing process. I remember you 20 years ago, many scholars underlined that religions are the source of violence, where conflicts where religion is involved, especially Islam, was very much labeled as a problem of conflicts. But also we had cults, we had Northern Ireland still very present in memory. And there were also titles like Violence as a Service to God, or Ambivalence of the Sacred, or people talked about intolerance as inherent to monotheistic religion. These were very important discussions at this time, and also they showed even in 2030 rise in religious hostilities, and the red countries, they rised a lot. Now there were discoveries of the multifactorial models of religious violence, factors like poverty, lack of religious freedom, state-religion overlap. There was underlined reactive character of religious violence. There were instrumental interpretations of religion has been used for violence, and religions as identity markers. And there was an internal critique of religious leaders who said that is not Islam, that is not Christianity, which is happening there. And then people discovered religious peaceful traditions in all religions to elaborate them more. There was a concept of religion-based actors for peace, with celebrities. Then there were religious organizations for peace studies and activism for peace, and also local and global infrastructures for peace, working very strongly and helpfully for peace. Also anti-Pentikainen, they did organize such a network for several years. Why religious actors and organizations are especially important partners for reconciliation? They are often trusted persons by communities, even beyond their religion. They are locally connected. They are sustainable. They stay there often a long time and are there still a long time. So it's much better than to make a project and send some peace workers somewhere for 3 years or something like this. They are influential. They are often committed and internationally connected. And therefore, they are very interesting partners in many cases if we can identify religious organizations and actors for reconciliation. Research questions could be, which are peaceful traditions in each religion, how they can be activated, how violent traditions can be overcome, how to describe main cases of religious activities for reconciliation, best practices, which problems are met in religious activities for reconciliation, and how cooperation between religious and non-religious actors can be sought and created and described scientifically. Then there is also a new observation. This would be my second point, the spirituality of reconciliation as a trans-religious experience. Reconciliation is a word that is used as an important term by representatives of many, maybe all bigger religions, but this is really an astonishing element because it was originally linked very much to Judaism with Yom Kippur. In Christianity, it was also strong. But there are many important representatives, for example, of Buddhism, who, when they speak English, talk about reconciliation. Thich Nhat Hanh, for example, is one of those persons, the Dalai Lama. And you find also Muslims and Hindus speaking on reconciliation. And this seems to me a new, also religious development. And here we have also to ask why to explain it. It can be a new religious experience as well, and it includes experiences of interconnectedness. Hang talks about interbeing, then we have Ubuntu, or Martin Buber talks about the zwischen, the between people. Experiences of forgiveness are impressive for many people, of empathy, of brotherhood and sisterhood. And maybe more precisely, we have also a development that reconciliation with oneself has been in modernity more and more a main issue. And it seems as if ideas of the judgment, afterlife, has been strongly internalized. So people are judging themselves, and even worse than the worst judges would do in every day because of not very important mistakes, having spent too much money on something they could have bought in the other shop for less, or things like this, but also deeper problems such as non-repairable guilt, limits of life, non-repairable losses, remorse, regret. And you have always to find yourself again and becoming identical and resonant with your own lives. And therefore activities like singing together, dancing, celebrating together, rituals, confessions, dialogues with friends, with priests become important elements for reconciliation with oneself. But people discover on this way also these 5 dimensions, and that also transcendence is important. Especially help to deal with what cannot be repaired or changed. So therefore, it might be an explanation why reconciliation was so appealing for many people. And even, this is my last point, we can even go beyond and think about the theory of reconciliation and the theory of religion. You can make a point that reconciliation is not one topic in some religions, but somehow also the topic of religion, to reconcile yourself with death, with limits of your life, with guilt, with fear, with uncontrollable situations. This is something religion is providing to people, how to live in a world you cannot understand rationally completely, and you can reconcile with this word reconciliation. But it's a theory people can discuss, and it's only a proposition. But also reconciliation theory can learn from religions that reconciliation needs mourning. And Rwanda gives also a wonderful example. They have a month of mourning in April to commemorate the genocide. It's called Kwibuka, which means memory. And this would be one element. Maybe we think not enough about collective mourning and how to mourn in a reconciling way. And then we have peace with God, which passes all understanding. It's a phrase which is said in many Christian services. In the Luther translation, it's even very philosophical, the peace that is higher than all reason. I think it's an appealing phrase because where comes peace from? And people who have somehow thought on mystics like French philosopher Georges Bataille that peace comes from the inner space. Or Thich Nhat Hanh talked, we have to be peace. And where comes peace from? So maybe there is some religious thoughts important to think peace in a complete way. And then also peace, which needs hope and reconciliation, and peace and hope sometimes must be found under conditions where it's very difficult to find it only rationally. I close with some pictures of the Kwibuka in 2020, remember, unite, renew. This is always a slogan. And here are a photo to show this. Thank you very much. There's only some thoughts to open discussions, and thank you very much.
So thank you so very much, Professor Leiner. So now we can open the debate. So we have some 20 minutes for the debate. And yes, now here we are.
Noted some questions.
Yes, there was a first question from Sami Adwan. By the way, in your talk, I think you answered partially already. So their first question was, maybe we can give directly the word to Sami Adwan, Professor Sami Adwan. Yes. Yes, here we are. So Professor Advan wrote, can we reach one definition of reconciliation, especially to reflect the asymmetric situation between different people? So the need of a working definition for reconciliation was underlined here. Can you hear us, Professor?
Yes, I'm with you. I think I came with these questions, especially after our colleague from Finnish, when he talked about Sami people, and also related to issues of reconciliation that took place in South Africa, or even Rwanda, or even in Ireland, north of Ireland also. It's a dilemma, but it's also some concept that has to be redefined that could be acceptable, I mean, by both, I mean, or all sides of the story, especially if we talk about a symmetric situation that exists. My concern is how we can empower people who are at the weaker or peripheral, situation, to be able to define what reconciliation means to them. What does it mean to them? I know there's approach to that. I know we all talk about it in different, in oration but in reality, what about the Sami people how they define their, concept of reconciliation? How Palestinian, for example, how Black in South Africa, how, I mean, these issues of course, this, I think, center or association, I think one of the issues that maybe like to elaborate more and discuss and reflect upon and try to gather as many definitions for reconciliation from all over the world, try to figure out what similarity, what the shared denomination among these definitions. Because reconciliation for, let's say, the pipeline or the digging of oil in north of Sweden, for example, and how it's been represented by petroleum or gas, companies, how they see it, I'm sure is different than those people who live part of their environment. And it's something just to elaborate on and to discuss and to share and to reflect and to give it enough discussions, because we cannot talk about reconciliation as one term, one definition, but how to put together, I mean, a consortium of themes or concepts that could be accepted or could be related. I myself hate to find or to define any concept that and impose it on others. I don't know who are the others, the enemy, the friends, the neighbors, etc. So that's, you know, I mean, my opening question and my thinking about this kind of how we go about that. If we are asked tomorrow, how do you find reconciliation? What we would say? Is it an approach? Is it a concept? Is it practicality? It's steps. You know. I'm throwing this to engage in and to deepen our understanding of this. I mean, terms.
I saw that Auntie already start answering this very good answer, and I completely can second. But I also believe, Sami, that this is the main goal of this association, which we're trying to establish, and this was our discussion with Martin and Toyomi for a long time. We don't want to come with one definition. We really want to give variety of options. We really want to show the different approaches, and it's very important to see what differences between define reconciliation and define reconciliation studies. It's very different things. Like reconciliation studies is how we study, right? It's more an idea how we approach reconciliation, while reconciliation can be defined in very different ways. But I just want to stress very important point which you brought, and I think it was shown in every single presentation today, is that reconciliation doesn't mean just building peace. It means also bringing equality and justice. And reconciliation, it means not just restore relationship, let's live in peace and don't harm each other, but it's really bring idea how we can restore past injustices, but how we can deal with asymmetric power, how we deal with this different level of discrimination, exclusion. And one of the ways which I see it's dealing with identities, how we give the space for people to be empowered, to make their voice stronger, so they will be equal partner in reconciliation. This equality of partnership of reconciliation is very key for how, like, for example, I see the whole association sees it.
May I say just a brief word also to this? I agree with many things Karina also said. I think for the scientific work, we need also to make clear what we are working about, because there is sometimes people who are saying, if you talk about reconciliation, what do you mean? Mm-hmm. But this does not mean that there is not an element of listening to the people in it, in this definition. And in the practical work, of course, we must be open to what people are understanding under reconciliation. And quite often I have the experience that people even do not like the word of reconciliation and prefer to talk about other terms, because the word creates misunderstandings for them and not good memories, so they prefer talking about coexistence or whatever. So we have really to work on this topic in this association more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now there was Philip McDonagh.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to recall John Hume, a very great man whom I had the privilege of working with over many decades. When John died this week, he had tributes from the Pope, the Dalai Lama, the US administration, and so on. I think he's universally recognized as a man who sought reconciliation between Catholic and Protestant, between Ireland and Britain. So I just mentioned, I think, two of John's ideas. One is the importance of working together so that parents can offer a better future to their children. You know, it's a simple idea: spill our sweat, not our blood. And I think another central idea of John's was that the big picture influences the small picture. So he saw the Northern Ireland peace process as reflecting somehow developments at a European level, the reconciliation between France and Germany. And finally, John believed very much that dialogue does change people's reality. I had the great privilege of going with him to meet the Tamil Tigers when the war in Sri Lanka was at its peak. And John did his very best to persuade the different actors that we shouldn't ask, what do these people stand for now? But we should ask what they may stand for in 1 year if we have a dialogue. So John believed in patient, non-violent methods, which are in themselves transformative. So I just thought I should make those points, because I do think if one is looking at case studies of how to promote reconciliation in society, that the case of John Hume does stand the test of time. He really achieved something over his lifetime. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Now we have yes.
Can I just step in?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, Tatsushi Arai, Kent State University School for Peace and Conflict Studies. I really appreciate the 4 fine presentations that really inspired me to think a lot. And I want to just offer a couple of observations as a contribution to building a meaningful and effective association. I want to echo one of the colleagues who mentioned something about a definition. And I agree with Karina and Ati and others in that we don't have to have a well-refined working definition. And at the same time, because there are so many associations, either to study peace and conflict or some other cognate subjects, I think it's important for the leadership of the association to at least outline what this association is about. That is needed. I think the negation of universal definition does not mean to be open to anything. And then I mentioned this because of the practical experiences of working in contexts such as Syria, Nigeria, Myanmar, Japan, China, etc. We happen to be using the English language, and then we kind of hang on to this connotation of the English term reconciliation. But as many people in this session expertly know, each language and civilization really defines reconciliation so differently. And in many languages, there are multiple terms that refer to what now English speakers would refer to reconciliation. And so even at the risk of being so simple to start with, we can choose to say this association studies the restoration of relationships adversely affected by harms inflicted, or at least a list of questions that this association as a starting point will be interested in. So that's my sort of a humble procedural suggestion. And the second thing I was very inspired to think about by listening to the presentations is that by virtue of doing an academic study, we have to make a reference to this case study and that case study. And at the same time, as people in this forum also know very deeply, any description of reconciliation process is multifaceted and contested. So when I define, for example, let's say the Nigerian reconciliation process or Syrian process, this went that way, I am so sure that there are 30 objections coming to my characterization. So although I think we can be open to that process, as an association, it would be useful to have some ground rules.
First of all, very nice to see you again. We already have a page. If you see the website, we actually was working on it, putting together one page, which we tried to make it as inclusive as possible, but also have some definitions. So, but it's just a draft. We really saw it as a opening dialogue. And Martin will be speaking, right, Martin, tomorrow about this particular ideas, how we can address it. But we did this one page. Please look at the website. And it's between, actually we had this discussion a lot about language and definition between Toyomi, Martin and me. We speak 7 different languages in very, very different cultural environment. So it's a very, very, very important point, and we really want as our association become more and more inclusive, we really want to have more and more inclusive understanding of it. But again, I think it's very important to define reconciliation studies in comparison of defined reconciliation. Martin, maybe you want.
Thank you very much, Professor Korostelina. Now we have Professor Asano. It is the last, yes, and then we go to the break. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, as Karina said, reconciliation itself and reconciliation studies should be differentiated. Reconciliation, we don't just simply applaud. We don't mean that. But why reconciliation is very hard? Maybe reconciliation studies must analyze why reconciliation is very difficult. And also, we don't also just simply assert the social status quo. Well, we don't mean to just make much of the peace itself. Sometimes peace are utilized as tools to suppress the minorities. So we must differentiate the reconciliation studies from reconciliation itself, and also sometimes the suppressed peoples try to mobilize the same peoples, and they share some kind of strong emotions or memories or universal values. So the reconciliation, the situations would be evoked when some kind of reconciliation might be different, might be necessary. In my argument, transformation of both sides could be defined as a kind of starting point for reconciliations. But in this way, activists or practitioners sometimes shout that reconciliation without justice is meaningless. Yeah, I think so. But such a justice itself or universal value itself must be discussed in our common shared concepts, or not shared, but in our discussions. Thank you so much.
Professor Asano, now we have actually Antti Pentikainen very shortly, and then Rettala.
Thank you, Francesco. So to Professor Adwan's question, and I think he gave a lot of detail himself, I'll give a Sami answer. So from the government side, we understood the Sami have to consult and lead the preparations, but our view was that they have to be informed before they take those decisions. So that's also reason why we provided the reconciliation studies. And within that studies also give a taste what personal reconciliation can mean. So one of the young Sami activists who was the vice president of the Sami youth, after one of our training actually with Father Michael Lapsley on the healing of the memories retreat said, and this is a quote, "Earlier, I thought that the purpose of a truth and reconciliation process is to give us back our rights. And I still think the rights are important, but now I understand that even much more important is to give my people the opportunity to be liberated from intergenerational pain." So she had realized by tasting it in her own setting what it could mean for an oppressed people to become liberated from intergenerational pain, which obviously has to connect also to how the rights are fulfilled, how they are included and taken into account in the decision making, but also the chance for healing. And I think this is the essence of reconciliation. If you just single it out into one corner, you lose a bigger picture. And I think she was very right. That's why I want to share that quote. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Antti. Now we have a break. Yes, a 10 minutes break. So see you shortly before 3 p.m. for the second session.
During the break, we have some greetings from President of our university. We will just play into the chat for those who want to look at them, and they will also be on our homepage. But now enjoy the break. 10 minutes, we come back together.
service.
more impressive. Das ist ja nicht so leicht, ein Bild zu kriegen. Man muss richtig raus mit diesem Badge. Man braucht mal eine Karte, um da wieder raus und reinzukommen.
Ah, okay. Na, du musst nicht sein.
I cannot hear Kantiner's greeting, by the way. It does not have any sound.
Hat er hier?
Really? Strange.